Hello, and welcome to the Grants to Support Families in the Justice System Programs training on how to fill out the JSF, or Justice for Families, Semi-Annual Progress Report. Thank you for accessing our recording, and we hope that this training enables you to provide the most detailed and accurate reporting of your grant-funded work on your semi-annual progress report. Accurate data reporting is important for many reasons. Your quantitative and qualitative data enable VAWA's effectiveness to be measured. VAWA MEI creates reports for OVW using your data and data from grantees across the country. We create summary data reports that support OVW to make requests for increased appropriations and to defend VAWA funding to decision makers. Your data also helps OVW to make sure federal funds are being spent appropriately and to measure the performance of grant programs. Additionally, every 2 years, the Attorney General is required to submit a report to Congress on the overall effectiveness of VAWA funding. VAWA grantee data makes up a significant part of that mandated report. So, the more consistently grantees fill out the reports, the more accurately VAWA's effectiveness can be measured through these means. So it is your responsibility as a federal grantee to submit data on your funded program every 6 months. And in a moment, we'll talk further about why your data matters and how it is used. But first, let's go over the reporting process. So first of all, congratulations. You were awarded a grant. So first you're awarded your grant, and the moment you become a grantee, you are mandated to complete the semi-annual progress reporting form 2 times a year. So these reports are due in January and July of each year. And so they're due 30 days after the close of the reporting period. That means the January to June reporting period is due July 30th, and the July to December reporting form is due January 30th. So that's important to remember. It's due 30 days after the close of the reporting period, not 31. So you will access this reporting form in your Grant Management System account, or GMS account. When you download the report each period, make sure you are downloading the form for the correct reporting period. Otherwise, you will not be able to successfully submit your form. We encourage you to download the report to your desktop so you can work on it in more than one sitting. When you are ready to submit the report, you will go ahead and validate it, and I'll talk about how to do that towards the end of this training. So you will validate it and then upload it back into the grants management system. So next, your report is reviewed by your program specialist at OVW, and they look at every report that is submitted by all VAWA grantees before they send that information on to us here at VAWA MEI. So if your program specialist contacts you during their review via a change request, they're asking you to make a change to your report, and then what you'll need to do is you'll need to revalidate your form and save it, and then re-upload it into GMS. So once all of those change requests are made and all of the reports are approved by OVW, they then send all of that data onto us here at VAWA MEI. And at VAWA MEI, we review the data and we look for any inconsistencies or questions that pop up. And while we go over the data, it's possible that we might contact you via email or phone with questions about what you have reported so that we can better understand it. At that point, if any changes need to be made based on the questions that we have, we will go ahead and make them on our end. You do not need to resubmit your report into GMS. And then, once we have finished reviewing the data and finalized everything, we create the reports, so the summary data reports for OVW, and post them on our website, and then we also aggregate that data for the 2-year period and put them into the report to Congress every 2 years. So let's look into how to approach the reporting process. As previously mentioned, the moment you become a grantee, you are mandated to complete the semi-annual progress report every 6 months. If funding has yet to be released for your program, or you have not used any funds yet, you are still mandated to complete a report. So if you are not using funds yet for grant-funded activities, you only need to complete the sections of the report that are mandatory, which are the general information, the coordinated community response, and the narrative. You will know if this is a mandatory section because they are labeled as all grantees must complete this subsection. And also if you don't fill out those part of the forms and you go ahead and try to validate, the validation process will not let you complete it until you have entered data into those sections. So we ask that grantees fill these sections out and then also provide narrative information explaining that your organization has no grant-funded activities to report, or your budget is still pending OVW approval. And when this happens, we will see that note, and then we'll address the grantee data accordingly. Once you do begin using funds, you will still need to answer the mandatory sections, but now you will also be filling out any sections that relate to the activities that you are being grant funded for or using grant funds for. You will not fill out sections of the form that you are not using grant funds for. For instance, if you did not use grant funds during a reporting period for training professionals, in the training section, you would click no at the start and then leave that entire section blank. It is very important to remember that on this form, you only report on grant-funded activities. Blank sections can be explained in the narrative if you so choose. So what if you have to submit more than one report in the same reporting period? This may be the case if you close out one grant and begin a new grant within the same reporting period. And if this is the case, we ask that you do your best to divide the staff FTEs and activities based on which grant funding supported each. So please try not to double count FTEs or grant-funded activities. For instance, if a full-time staff person was paid by Grant A for 3 months and paid by Grant B for the other 3 months of the reporting period, their time should be split between the 2 reports and not reported as full-time on both. I also want to note that once you have determined how you will divide your data between the 2 reports, OVW and us here at VAWA MEI ask that you use the final narrative question to list the project numbers for both awards, indicate the time periods that each cover, and then verify that FTEs are prorated and that victim services numbers and any other grant-funded activities that are reported are divided between the 2 reports. So on this next slide, we have some tips on successful data reporting. So we recommend that you read the separate instructions. These can be downloaded from our website, and there are many helpful examples to assist you in filling out the reporting form. Throughout this form, there are other categories listed for many questions. In general, we ask that you use the other category only as a last resort. If you can find a way to put the information into a category that already exists or that is a close fit, please do so. When we aggregate data for reports, often questions in the other category will not get included in the reports. If you do choose to use other, please be as specific as possible. For example, if you have more than one entry in other, let us know how the overall total is broken down between the multiple entries. Following most sections of the form, you will find optional narrative questions. You can use these sections to talk about the unique successes of your program, give examples, or provide us information from evaluations or exit interviews with people served by your program, or relate a story of a successful intervention. We ask that you try not to use acronyms or abbreviations in your data. If you do use an acronym, please provide an explanation in each question where you use it so that we can understand what you're trying to report. Please do not use attachments or extra documents to provide data that is asked for in the report unless your program specialist specifically tells you to do so. And that is because only the data that is contained in the reporting form itself will be received and analyzed by us at VAWA MEI. So that information won't get put into any of our reports and therefore won't be used to defend funding. So it's important to try to contain everything that you can in the reporting form itself. And then lastly, before we move on to the reporting form, I just want to give a plug for giving us a call or sending us an email. Here at VAWA MEI, we are funded to provide technical assistance and training to all of OVW and VAWA grantees. So we're really happy to help you through filling out these forms and to lessen the burden on you. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and dive into the reporting form itself. And the first section of the form is section A1, grant information. And this is the first section of the form that is required for all grantees to fill out. So here, you will go ahead and start filling out with question 1, obviously. In question 1, date of report, you'll go ahead and fill in the date you upload your report into GMS and submit it to OVW. Questions 2 through 4 will be pre-populated for you when you download the form from GMS. And I just want to quickly note these question marks next to each question. And so if you click on the question mark, information from the instructions for the JFF semi-annual progress report will pop up to help you answer that question. And you will find these throughout the entire form. So moving down to question number 5, type of agency or organization. So here it asks for the type of lead agency or organization, and you would go ahead and select the option that best describes the lead agency. If you check off court in question 5, then you will be required to answer question 5A, where you report the type of court. On the next page, we have question 6, point of contact. And for this question, we ask that you provide contact information for the person who knows the most about the day-to-day activities funded by your JFF grant. And we ask that it is the person who knows the most because this is the person that we will reach out to if we have any questions about the reporting form itself. So it makes things easier when we're getting in contact with the most efficient person. Question number 7, tribal populations. So you would go ahead and indicate yes to this question if you specifically address tribal populations with your JFF grant. And if you select yes, you would go ahead and list out the specific tribal populations that you serve. Answers such as all tribes in our states or the use of etc. are not valid responses. This should not include tribal populations who just happen to live in your service area, or if an American Indian or Alaskan Native just happens to come in for services. In most cases, if you indicate yes here, your program's intentions are to focus on a specific tribe or nation, and those would have been included in your grant proposal. Question 8 is where you just indicate whether or not the lead funded organization is a faith-based organization. And then question number 9 is where you report the percentage of funds directed to each area. You report the areas addressed by your JFF grant during the current reporting period by estimating the approximate percentage of funds or resources committed to each area or victimization area. When you're determining the percentage, you should take into account the number of cases or clients, the amount of time spent on those types of cases, training activities, the source of referrals, etc. Just know that the total for this section must equal 100%. And it is okay if the percentage of funds directed to each area change from reporting period to reporting period. So the next section, Section A2, Staff Information. So if you used JFF funds to support staff positions during the current reporting period, you would click yes and answer question 10. If you did not use JFF funds to support staff during the current reporting period, you would click no, and you would go ahead and move on to section B. But say you did use funds to support staff, you would want to report staff funded by your grants and only staff funded by your grant. And so that includes people who are salary, people who are fully or partially funded by grant funds, and you would also want to include staff time of contracted work. You would report by activity performed rather than job title. So this is an important point because staff positions at different agencies can have different names, but we want to understand the basic function that that person is performing. And since we're interested in the activity or function that they're performing rather than their job title, it's possible for a staff member to fall into 2 or more categories because they have different functions that are housed underneath their position. So if that happens, you would want to go ahead and divide the FTEs among the applicable categories. And I will go through an example shortly to help you think through how to go about doing that. For this section, you want to report to the second decimal place. Time should be prorated if necessary. So this would be such as when someone is part-time, was hired part-way through the grant period, is a contractor, or is full-time, but only partially funded by JFF program funds. And then please use the other category sparingly. And so for the most part, activities performed by staff are included in the listed categories that already exist here. But if you do use the other category, please be specific about the function that staff person was performing. And then in the other descriptor, if you list out more than one staff in that other category, please correlate each entry with an FTE amount. So on this next slide, we have kind of a guide to help you calculate FTEs for this reporting form. You can calculate FTEs 2 ways, really. You can either take the total number of grant-funded hours and divide that by 1,040. And so you would want to divide it by 1,040 because that is the amount of full-time working hours available during this 6-month reporting period. And that was calculated by taking 40 hours a week and multiplying that by the 26 weeks in a reporting period to, again, give you 1,040 working hours. So yes, you can either take the total number of grant-funded hours that that staff person worked in that 6-month reporting period and divide that by 1,040. Or if the staff person consistently worked a certain number of grant-funded hours a week throughout the entire reporting period, you could take that number and divide it by 40, since the denominator in this calculation is all based on the full-time work week. So I have a couple examples to walk through. And the first one here is focused on reporting grant-funded personnel only. And so say your organization received a JFF program grant that was used to fund one full-time paralegal whose salary is 75% funded by the grant, and another full-time paralegal whose salary is 15% funded by the grant. So in this case, you would report only the JFF-funded personnel. So the correct FTE that would go under paralegal would be 0.90 FTEs. And that is the 75% or 0.75 plus the 15% or 0.15 of those FTEs that were funded with JFF funds to equal 0.90. Our next example is focusing on reporting by job function and not title. So this is the example that I was referring to just shortly ago. So, and this can be a tricky one to keep in mind, but again, we want you to report by job function and not title. So let's say your JFF grant was used to fund a full-time program coordinator who spends 26 hours per week coordinating program activities throughout the entire 6-month reporting period, and then 14 hours per week providing legal advocacy. So in this case, you would want to divide that staff time by the function they performed. So the correct FTE under program coordinator would be 0.65 because they spent 26 hours out of the 40-hour work week performing program coordinator activities. And then in the legal advocate category, you would report 0.35 because the staff person spent 14 hours out of their 40-hour work week providing legal advocacy. Our next example is focusing on prorating FTEs for staff who worked only part of the reporting period. So, say for example, your JFF program grant funded a full-time trainer that was hired 2 months into the reporting period. So in this case, you would need to prorate the FTE to reflect the 4 months of this 6-month reporting period that they worked. So the correct FTE under trainer would be 0.67, which is the 4 months divided by 6 months. So since this staff person was fully funded by JFF program funds for the entirety of those 4 months, you could go ahead and take it a step back even further from just calculating the hours per week, since this was consistently, this staff person was working consistently in those 4 months of the 6-month reporting period. So again, prorating FTEs for staff who only worked part of the reporting period. My next example is focused on converting funding used for contractors or consultants into FTEs to be reported into this section of the form. So if your JFF program grant paid for an attorney that was paid 65 hours of work, you would convert this time into FTEs by taking the 65 hours that were worked in the 6-month reporting period and divide those by 1,040 hours, which would give you 0.06, which you would then report in the attorney category. And this example also touches on the fact that we're interested in the function that they performed rather than their job title or placement. So in this example, they're a contractor or they're a consultant, and we're not necessarily interested in that they're a contractor or a consultant. We're interested in what function this person was performing, and so in that case, you would go ahead and report them in the attorney category for this example because they were an attorney. So that's all of the examples I have for the staff section, and I just want to give a quick plug that if you have more questions about this section and how to calculate FTEs, please give us a call or send us an email. We are really happy to walk through any questions that you may have about the reporting form and how to report. So again, send us an email, give us a call. So the next section of the reporting form is section B, purpose areas. And this is another one of those sections that are mandatory for all grantees to fill out. So in this section, there's question number 11, and in this question you should check off all of the purpose areas that apply to activities you engaged in with JFF funds during the current reporting period. And if you are unsure about which program areas apply to your grant program, you should refer back to your grant proposal. If some of your program areas changed, you can check them in this question. Just please know that your program specialist must approve all changes to your purpose areas. And also in this section is question number 12, and here you would detail the program priority areas or special interest categories addressed by your JFF program grant. Priority areas is a reference to a specific item that OVW would have included in the solicitation under which you applied. Some years they include priorities and other years they do not. This is not what you may consider your program priorities in terms of serving victims or survivors. If you are unclear about what your program priority areas are, refer back to the solicitation under which you applied and/or your grant proposal. Section C1, training. So if you used JFF program funds for training during the current reporting period, you would click yes and answer questions 13 through 16, and if not, you would select no and then skip on to section C2. And just for context, and so you understand what information should be reported here and what is considered training, I'm going to go ahead and define it. So for the purposes of this form, training is defined as activities for professionals or volunteers acting in the role of a professional to improve their response to victim survivors as it relates to their role in the system. So this is providing training to professionals or volunteers acting in the role of a professional to help the response to victim survivors in your community and in their role in the system at large. So you complete this section if grant funds directly supported the training of non-grant funded people who are professionals or volunteers acting in the role of a professional. So we do not want you to include staff development of grant-funded staff in this section. Also quickly noting that if you did use JSF program grant funds for training, there is a required narrative information question in this section, which is different from a lot of the other sections in that a lot of them do not require the narrative information question, but for this one it is required. And so to report in this section, question number 13 is where you report the training activities that were provided, granted that those training activities were supported with your JFF program funds. In question number 14, number of people trained, you would report the number of people trained through the training events that were reported in question 13, and you report the attendees by discipline. Go through the list of existing categories, and in the appropriate category, report the number trained. Again, please do not count grant-funded staff when grant-funded staff attend a grant-funded training event. This is considered staff development and is not reported in this form at all in terms of the quantitative data. Please feel free to write about that in the narrative questions if you would like to. Next is question number 15, training content areas, and here you would check all of the content areas that were addressed in the training events that you provided during the current reporting period that are reported in question number 13. And like I previously mentioned, question 16, training events require narrative information, so you must complete this narrative question if the training section is completed. And here you will want to discuss the effectiveness of the training events funded or supported by JFF grant funds and any other additional information you would like to share about your training activities beyond what you have already provided in the data. I have an example for us to walk through. In my training example, the JFF program grant funded trainer held 10 training events for attorneys, law students, and legal service staff this reporting period. Your organization also supported 3 training events with other funds. 210 professionals attended the grant-funded training events, and 45 professionals attended training events provided with other funds. So in this case, you would only report the 10 grant-funded trainings in question number 13, and then in question 14, you would go ahead and report those 210 professionals that attended those 10 grant-funded training events. So I have 150 in attorneys and law students, and another 60 in legal services staff, to total 210. You would then go to question number 15 and indicate the training content areas. So here I have domestic violence laws, sexual assault laws, etc., indicating what those training events reported in question 13 were training on. And then in question 16, you would go ahead and talk about those training events and any other information you would like to share about the training activities that were funded with JFF funds. Section C2, planning. So you would only complete section C2 if you are in the planning phase of your JFF grant or you engaged in planning phase activities during the current reporting period. So if you did engage in planning phase activities or you are in your planning phase, you would go ahead and check yes and answer questions 17 through 19, and if not, check no and move on to section C3. But to answer the questions in this section, for question 17, planning activities conducted. This is where you would document the planning activities that you conducted during the current reporting period, and you would check all that applies. In question 18, you would use this question to detail technical assistance activities with OVW designated TA providers. Be sure to address site visits, consultations, tools, and resources received. The last question in this section is question 19, and you could use this question to provide any additional information about planning activities. So this is an optional question. So you may choose to answer it or you may choose not to. Section C3, Coordinated Community Response. So this is another one of those sections that are mandatory for all grantees to complete. And Coordinated Community Response, or CCR, provides a picture of the relationships that you have with other agencies and organizations within your community and the frequency with which you interact with these agencies and organizations. This should include all agencies and organizations you interact with, not just your grant or memorandum of understanding partners. You report the different agencies and organizations that you are engaging with in this section. So all grantees must answer question 20, and what you would do to complete this question is check the frequency with which you provide or receive referrals, consultations, and or technical assistance with the agencies and organizations listed in the first section. So this, the first column indicates the type of agency or organization, and then the next major column is where you indicate those coordination activities, so the referrals and consultations, and you would indicate by the frequency. And then in the next one, you report the frequency with which you meet with the agencies and organizations listed in the first column. And these meetings are often associated with system change. So that's task force meetings, meetings to address changes to specific forms, policies, or protocols. And then in the last column, you would go ahead and indicate which agencies and organizations are your project partners. And there is an optional additional information question in this section. So question 21, you can go ahead and fill out and talk about the effectiveness of your CCR activities that are funded or supported by your JFF program grant, or the ones that aren't supported by your JFF grant. This is a great space to include details and additional information about those very important activities that you engage in. Section C4, Policies. So here you would report in this section if you used JFF funds to develop, substantially revise, or implement policies or protocols during the current reporting period. And by substantially revised, we mean that you spent a good amount of time revising the policy or protocol. Simply adding the name of another group under your underserved populations policy would not constitute as a revision, unless separate protocols around how to serve the new group were also included in that change. So if you did use funds for these activities, click yes and answer questions 22 and 23. If not, click no and move on to section C5. In question number 22, you want to report the policies and or protocols that were developed, substantially revised, or newly implemented during the current reporting period, and check all that apply. And then in question 23, this is a required narrative question for this section, and you should use this space to describe the policies or protocols that were developed, substantially revised, and or implemented using JFF funds during the current reporting period. Section C5, products. So if JFF program funds were used to develop or substantially revise products during the current reporting period, go ahead and click yes and answer question 24. If not, check no and skip on to section C6. But if you did use JFF funds for products during this reporting period, you would go ahead and indicate the type of product that you developed or revised, the number that you developed or revised in the next column, which is typically 1. And then you would write out the title or topic of that product, the intended audience, and if it was developed or produced in another language, you would go ahead and identify that in this last column. If it was not developed in any other language besides English, you would just go ahead and leave it blank. Section C6, victim survivor outreach, information, and referrals to victim services. So if JFF funds were used for outreach to victim survivors, you would report those activities here. If you did use JFF funds to conduct these activities, check yes, answer questions 25 through 27. If not, check no, move on to section D. But again, if you did use JFF funds for these activities, in question 25, you would report the number of victim witness notification and outreach to victims or survivors. So outreach includes unsolicited letters, phone calls, or visits made to the victim survivors. In question number 26, you report the type of information provided to the victim survivor by checking all that apply. And then in question 27, this is where you will report the victim or survivor referrals to victim services. You will report both the governmental and the non-governmental services that you referred these victims to. Section D, court-based activities and services. So this section is a little lengthy and is broken up into different activities. And so if JFF funds were used for court-based activities and services, you would complete the applicable sections that are listed here on the PowerPoint slide. So I'm not going to read through them right now because you can see them, but if you answered yes to any of the sections that are listed on this slide, as in yes, you used JFF program funds to support data collection, case coordination, or specialized courts, or dockets, criminal cases, civil protection orders, family cases, court-based probation, or other offender or respondent compliance monitoring, and or BIP or sex offender management. If you use JFF funds for any of those activities, then you are required to also complete the narrative question that is at the very end of all of these sections. So that's just a quick note that it will be required, and you will not be able to validate the form without completing that narrative if you check yes to any of those sections. Also just want to touch back on the idea of the idea in the staff section of reporting by function rather than job title. So if a grantee uses funds for Section D, specialized courts or dockets, Section D3, criminal cases, D4, civil protection orders, or D5, family cases, we would expect to see FTEs in the staff section, so Section A2, in at least one of the categories of case docket manager, court clerk, judge or judicial officer, or program coordinator. So again, that's reporting by job function in those sections, and you can also use that as a guide telling you which sections of this form and this court-based activities services section that you should be completing. So again, if you fill out section D2, D3, D4, or D5, we would expect to see a court or docket manager, court clerk, judge or judicial officer, or a program coordinator. Also, if you complete sections D6, probation or compliance monitoring, or D7, so BIP or sex offender management, we would expect to see the FTEs of probation or compliance monitor in section A2 staff information. So, and then we would expect to see batterer intervention program staff in the staff section if you completed section D7. So moving into those sections individually now, section D1 is data collection or case coordination, and here you would answer yes to question to this section if you used JSF funds to develop, install, expand, or coordinate data collection, communication, or coordination systems during the current reporting period. If you didn't use JSF funds for those activities, go ahead and click no and move on. But if you did, in question number 28, use of Justice for Families program funds, you would go ahead and check all that apply in indicating the activities that you engaged in with JSF program funds. And then in question 29, you would indicate the purpose of the data collection, communication, and or coordination system that you used JSF funds to support. And again, check all that apply. Section D2, specialized courts or dedicated dockets, infrastructure, and activities. So if you used JSF program funds to plan, develop, expand, or enhance specialized courts or dedicated dockets during the current reporting period, go ahead and answer yes and answer questions 30 through 31. If not, check no, move on to section D3. But if you did use JSF funds for this, in question 30, types of cases, you would check all case types addressed by the grant-funded court or docket. If specialized court or dedicated docket has not begun addressing cases, you don't need to answer this question and just go ahead and move on to question 31. But in question 31, and then in question 31, specialized court infrastructure or activities, you would go ahead and check all that apply for your JSF program-funded infrastructure and activities that you engaged in during the current reporting period. Section D3, criminal cases. If your JFF funds were used for criminal cases during the current reporting period, you would answer yes and fill in questions 32 through 35. If not, check no, move on to the next section of the form. But if you did, in question 32, disposition of cases, in this question, you would report the dispositions of all sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and or stalking-related cases resolved in your JFF program-funded court during the current reporting period. So cases involving multiple charges should be characterized by the most serious offense or charge, and cases should be categorized as sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, or stalking, even if your state law uses other names for these offenses. So we would still like you to indicate the related victimization, even if your law uses other names for the types of offenses, so such as sexual battery or harassment. You can go ahead and still fill that information into the sexual assault categories as appropriate. And then in question, the next question is 32A, number of offenders were ordered to BIP sexual offender management or other offender treatment. So here you would report the number of offenders ordered to BIP or sexual offender management or some other offender treatment for all of the cases for which dispositions were reported in question 32. So this question 32A is in relation to question 32. The next question, question 33, is where you report the number of criminal protection orders requested and granted by the victimization in criminal cases, and you indicate whether they were imposed as a condition of bail or deferred disposition probation. In question 34, judicial monitoring, you report the number of offenders whose cases were reviewed by your JFF-funded court for compliance with conditions of probation or other court-ordered conditions, or for violations of those conditions by the type of case. The number of offenders reviewed is an unduplicated count. For the number of individual review hearings conducted, you would report the number of individual hearings held for each offender, even when that offender is reviewed during the same monitoring sessions as other offenders. And then question 35, dispositions of violations of court orders. You report the total number of sexual assault, domestic or dating violence, and or stalking violations for which there were judicial dispositions during the current reporting period. The violation does not have to have occurred during this reporting period, only the disposition. And a case may be counted more than once if there were multiple violations. Section D4, civil protection orders. So you would indicate yes in this section that if JFF program funds were used for civil protection order cases during the current reporting period, and if not, check no, move on to section D5. But if you did use JFF funds for civil protection order cases during the current reporting period, you want to answer questions 36 through 39, and in 36A, you report the number of protection orders requested and granted by your JFF-funded court by the victimization. And then in question 36B, civil protection orders, you would only complete this question if your court does not distinguish protection orders by victimization. In question 37, relief granted. So for protection orders that were reported in questions 36A or 36B, we want you to report the types of relief that was granted in those orders here in question 37. And then if the court conducted any post-judgment reviews of civil protection orders for compliance, you would want to go ahead and answer questions 38 and 39. So in 38, you indicate the number of protection order cases reviewed at the hearings, and then also the number of individual protection order cases reviewed, case review hearings conducted. And then question 39 is where you would report any additional information on post-judgment or post-adjudication reviews of protection order conditions and the process for handling protection order violations. Section D5, family cases. If your JFF program funds were used for family cases during the current reporting period, check yes, answer questions 40 through 42. If not, click no, skip on to section D6. But if you did use JFF funds to support family cases during the current reporting period, in question 40, which is the number of new and pending family cases addressed by the court and the number of hearings conducted in family cases, you would go ahead and report the number of cases addressed by the funded court, and then, again, as well as the number of hearings. If the court conducted any post-judgment reviews of family cases, you would then want to answer questions 41 and 42. In 41 is where you report the number of post-judgment or post-adjudication family cases reviewed at hearing, and then the number of individual post-judgment or post-adjudication family cases review hearings. And then in question 42 is where you provide any additional information on the post-disposition enforcement actions or reviews of family cases. Section D6, court-based probation or other offender respondent compliance monitoring. So if your JFF program funds were used for probation or other offender or respondent compliance monitoring during the current reporting period, go ahead and check yes and answer questions 43 and 44. If not, check no and move on to section D7. But if you did use funds for these activities, in question 43, you would report the number of offenders or respondents, and you would report the number monitored by the victimization type. You would also report the number who were with or without violations as of the end of the reporting period. In question 44, monitoring activities, you would want to report the number of offenders who received each type of activity, as well as the total number of contacts or review. Section D7, Batterer Intervention Program, or Sex Offender Management. So if grant funds were used to support BIP or sex offender management activities, you would go ahead and check yes and answer questions 45 through 48. And if not, check no and move on to section D8. But if you did use JFF funds for these activities, in question 45, you would report the number of offenders or respondents in your BIP during the current reporting period. In question 46, you would report the number of offenders or respondents in your sex offender management program during the current reporting period. And then in question 47, you would report the number of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, or stalking offenders or respondents in your program who completed the program, who were terminated from the program, or who returned to the program after termination during the current reporting period. And then in question 48, you would report the number of weeks batterers are expected to remain in the program in order to complete it. If your BIP has more than one program length and or curriculum, please provide the link for each type of program. Section D8, court-based activities and services narrative. So this was the narrative that I was talking about when I began speaking about Section D. If you use JFS program funds to address purpose area number 5 during the current reporting period, or you answered yes to any of Section D's activities, so D1 through D7, you must select yes to this section and then complete question 49. However, if you didn't answer anything in Section D, then click no and move on to Section E. But if you did in question 49, additional information, you would discuss the effectiveness of your JFS-funded court-based activities and services, and you could also provide any additional information you would like to share about those activities. Again, I would just like to put a plug in for you reaching out to us here at VAWA MEI if you have any questions about anything on the form. Again, we're here to help you and make this process less painful, so please reach out if you have any questions.